Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 252, and I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today first team sports scientist at Shrewsbury Town, Ben Sutcliffe. Ben, how are we?
All good, mate. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I've said this quite a lot of times on the podcast. We've had a conversation there for the last sort of 10, 15 minutes, which we should definitely have recorded.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll cover some of that in a second because it is very, very relevant at the moment. Ben, kick us off, mate. I've mentioned first team sports scientist at Shrewsbury. I know you've also got a role with the Welsh FA as well. But can you just take us on a bit of a journey of your career so far?
Yeah, sure. So I guess growing up as a kid, always involved in football. I was actually an athlete at the same time. So my actual event was sprint hurdles. So I come from sort of athletics background as well as football. But I guess my path to what's led me here has sort of started when I was 14, looking for a bit of extra pocket money. I thought, hey, why not be a ref for my sins? And yeah, sort of carried that on. So through the athletics and reffing, moved down to Swansea. Did 3 years at Swansea, doing my bachelor's. Mainly for the athletics side, ended up dropping it and found other things to do, as you do at uni. But yeah, so in my final year then, I was looking at, listen, I'm going to be doing this for 6 months. What can I do that's going to keep me interested and I'm going to engage with and want to do in my spare time? So sort of went down the refereeing route, got in touch with the FAW, so the Welsh Football Association, and said, listen, I'm looking at doing this study. What level referees can I get? I'm looking at just doing sort of an account of what does match demands for Welsh refereeing look like. So that was just sort of looking at GPS metrics. And fortunately enough, the head of refereeing came back and said, listen, we're more than happy to give you elite referee data. So sort of for that 6-month period, I had access to all their data on the caveat that I just did a bit of work with them, training, monitoring, and they use Polar. So it's all remote. I could just do it from home, log on a laptop and just see what their training data looked like. And then through that in the summer, fortunately enough, the old fitness coach there was just an ex-referee. So sort of fell into the role, and UEFA and FIFA were looking at more of a, listen, they need to have sports science background or sports science qualifications, and sort of stepped my way into that role. So I've carried that on now. That was 2019. Again, it's still remote. We have a lot more contact and hopefully a lot better training programs that get sent out now. But yeah, carried that on. Then from there, finished that, moved back home, did my MSc at John Moores. So Liverpool John Moores, great cohort. I think you just had Jacob on a few episodes ago, who was in the same year as me. And yeah, carried that through. Got involved then with Liverpool Women. And this is probably sort of where my numbers, geeky, maths background comes from. And did my study into looking at individualization of speed thresholds in women's football. So I know like people like Dawn Scott and people like that had touched on it in the past. But I looked at using mass and anaerobic speed reserve as sort of setting them thresholds as to does the absolute values account for, or does it over account or under account for what they actually do in the game. So from that became sort of a GPS nerd and an Excel spreadsheet, one of them. And then as I was finishing that, COVID hit. So I ended up doing a 4-hour physiology exam in my bedroom, which was not the most fun thing I've ever done. But yeah, sort of everything stopped, and that gave me sort of the good thing of what everyone was doing at the time of Zoom training sessions, and really having to prescribe things that we can do at home, and sort of got me to appreciate what we can do when we don't have any kit. Like you've got the basic kit, referees don't even have dumbbells in their house. Like we're having to do body weight stuff. What can we do? And trying to make the most of that. And then through that, got in touch with Tony Strudwick at the FAW and said, listen, I'm trying to get some more hands-on stuff now. COVID's sort of back end of COVID. have you got anything to go in? Unfortunately for me at the time, he said, if you'd asked me a week ago before the camp, I could have got you in with the seniors. So I was like, but it is what it is. And luckily, people had moved up and there's a spot of the under-17s came available. So I was buzzing, like obviously going away on international camps, and as my first real sort of hands-on experience, learnt loads. I'd say one of the biggest learning curves for me is I was left the gym of 16-year-olds to go and get a speaker charger. 1 minute later, playing two touch, screaming their heads off, whilst there's a yoga session going on down the corridor. And then had it in the earful from the head coach because he's like, what's going on? They're out of control. So I guess that's don't trust 15, 16-year-olds.
I'm
Even
sure
if
there'll
they're
be quite a
international
few
players.
people that relate to that.
Uh,
Definitely.
So yeah, sort of learnt loads on that. You're a one-man band from 7:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night doing all sorts of hydration testing, and especially when you're out in Portugal, like these kids don't understand that they have to take on a load more water or they have to drink a load more, just to fuel for performance. And from that, moved over to Blackburn Rovers in an academy role to start with, so academy sports science intern. Again, great hands-on experience all the way from under 9s all the way up to 23s. In the building all the time, learning loads off great practitioners over there, and loads from the head of sports science. Like we went on a camp away. They normally went up to Scotland, but unfortunately they couldn't do it, so they just did it at the training ground. But they're getting the kids in at 6:30 in the morning to do laps of the training ground, carrying like med balls and weighted bags, just a mental toughness. And that I took loads from that in the sense of how to build a robust athlete, and that ultimately we got this amount of demand for us. It's not always just physical, it's mental as well. And sort of teaching them that this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do. The games are going to be the easiest thing you ever do. The training is going to be the bit in the middle, and that's where you improve.
Yeah.
And then from there, sort of my CPD to the academy was building a GPS database for the academy. So at the moment they just use catapult reports directly straight off the website. So from that, I got in touch with the first team and Liam Mason at the time, and said, listen, can I sit down and say, this is what I'm thinking of doing? Can we get something involved in the academy? And he sat me down and said, these are our philosophies. And it was honestly a brilliant experience to hear that from the head of the first team when you're just looking after the under 9s and 12s. But then got in touch with Sam Holt, who was leading the GPS there. And we ended up brainstorming a load of things and ended up getting a decent pathway through the whole club that looked, listen, this is what the first team report looks like, and you're under 16 getting this report. And it allowed for smooth transition again then of players as they go up. Listen, it's already in this database. I'll just copy and paste all their data when they transition between squads. And then, as I'm sure we'll touch on in a minute, a change of manager happens and a new director of performance comes in who wants it completely differently. So you're almost like, we've spent 3 months doing all this work to have to scrap it again and start from the beginning. But then again, like upskill on Power BI and stuff like that. You're learning loads off, again, new people who want it doing differently. So we sort of transitioned from a multi-mechanical model to volumes and intensities as a whole, and really a big focus on intensity compared to games and meters per minute. And then, yeah, so Sam moved on and I sort of just became the GPS guy of download, the first team. But again, it's exposure and it's sort of grasping any opportunity you can. Listen, that was a great opportunity to get up, and I ended up doing loads for the first team and then having to do the under 9s in the evening. And it was a great experience to have that both hands on of, right, I can watch what other people do, but also experiment with my own ideas of, if you can't get a 9-year-old to listen to you, like you're not going to get a first team player. And then sort of moved into the role I'm at Shrewsbury now. So that's more gym based. Again, just trying to do an overall view of myself of what was I weak at the time. So I was great at GPS, but hadn't really had that gym exposure. So I came in here, hopefully have improved it and developed my gym based side of it. But then also obviously the whole periodization. And I guess that's where I thought to myself, I've worked in the academy now. It's given me some great tips on building robustness, but at the end of the day, I think my focus is always then going to be performance based and trying to get that 1% out of players. What's the best way we can do that? So I hope I haven't waffled on for too long about.
No, that's a really good breakdown, mate. Really good breakdown. You mentioned a few things that we're going to get into. The periodization we'll cover in a second, but just to kick us off, the manager changes. Obviously, it's something that probably going into a club and a role, you get to know the way that coaches and managers will work. You maybe think you've got it nailed for a certain point, and then things can change, can't they? Whether that's determined by results or whatever it is determined by. What's your approach? Because I know we spoke about this. This is one of the things we spoke about before we started recording. There's been very different approaches that I know that you've worked with, none right over than others, I'm sure you'll say. But what's your approach as a practitioner, and what information do you need to draw from the coach when that change happens?
I think for us, it's going back to Blackburn. That went from a English manager to a foreign manager, and that sort of brought in the change of, right, we're going to more of a European way of leading. So you've gone from a Sunday, Wednesday off into a 4-day leading, and it's sort of, where do you get your load in? Can you have a heavy day in the gym? Can you go super heavy, have a heavy Tuesday, and then go again on the next day? And sort of balancing that off between how can we do that? Then here again at Shrewsbury, you've gone from a well-established manager to sort of a new fresh project. So a director of football's come in, who's recruited a head coach. So it's almost like now, instead of answering to a manager, you're answering to two people, where it's a head coach who's got his philosophies, or a director of football who's putting a structure in through the whole club, and sort of how we balance that. So again, touching on this season, we've gone from a low block transition team into a super high press team, which is a crazy change for us in terms of loading, but that only happened a week before pre-season. So it's almost like you've got this all planned, planned your off season, and all of a sudden someone just lobbed a grenade in and gone, here you go, completely different way we're going to be playing. They're going to need these demands. And all of a sudden you're like, I'm not sure if we're prepped for that. And then your whole pre-season discussion changes, and you're trying to draw on how he plays. Again, we'll probably touch on it in periodization later on, but you're breaking the game down into its 4 moments. So it's attack and defending, and both transitions in them zones. Again, your transitions defensively probably haven't changed too much, but it's how the manager now wants to do that attacking side, and the attacking transitions, it's super different, and is a lot of different tolerance. It's a lot more mechanical load on the body with the XL decels, and how do we prep that not only on the pitch, but what does our gym work marry up to that? Can we afford to go super heavy or eccentric in the gym if we know that they're going to be doing this amount of high intensity XL decels on the pitch? And it's sort of marrying the two up, and ultimately football comes first.
Yeah.
Ultimately he's the head coach for a reason, and it's his philosophies that are hopefully going to bring results. And it's just how can we match and marry the sports science to that?
Because if you put you solely a sports science head on with that challenge in front of you, you go, oh, we'll have this build-up period, we'll have a certain program that's going to last for a certain amount of time, then players will be ready. But that just isn't real world, is it? So with such a fast turnaround there, What advice would you give to someone in a similar situation in terms of we need to be ready in X amount of time, and that's got to be the case?
I think for me, you can't ever be too comfortable in or rigid in what you're planning. It's got to be these are our philosophies as a sports science and medical department, but within that, can we change what we do? So I guess we were quite rigid in, right, we had a super long break as well, so that was another factor that got thrown in. The old manager didn't want us in before the 1st of July because for whatever reason the players' mental, he just had this thing that players would be mentally different if they came in before. They think, oh, we're in super early. But ultimately then when it changed over, it gave us 1 week less to adapt to that change. Now, hopefully, the way we planned the off season was that the old manager used to do, I think, 9.5k high intensity running in the first week of pre-season. So we're already super conscious that that's going to be a case from the old manager. Again, it's probably just that change of accel decel that we didn't anticipate, and it's just building that in slowly. So obviously the manager's going to have his principles. He's going to go in from day one. But we had a staged return anyway, where listen, the balls ain't out till day 3, day 4. So hopefully we could have changed the sort of things they did in them first 2 days. Obviously, you don't want to ramp it up straight away, but you're looking to change the bits that we had control of. And okay, the manager will now wants to do this. Do we then need to either push on more in certain areas or take off in certain areas in the conditioning that we do in the afternoons? And again, in the gym, do we want a load of plyometric landings if their accel decel is going through the roof? Again, it's just questions that you need to be asking yourself, just to tick over and say, overall, what is the player's load, and are they used to that, and can they tolerate it, and hopefully not break down.
Yeah, definitely. I'll use your analogy of another grenade being thrown in, is the rule changes for this season, which everyone listening now is probably just thinking, yeah, how do we go about this? Because you've just been talking again before we started recording about the first couple of games. And I think we said, was it 16 minutes added on in total in the second game, was it? Is that right?
Yeah, so first game we played 112, which I think was the second highest in the Football League. And then, last night we played 104, so well over what we were used to.
And I know Tony's put some great stuff out about the sort of differences and demands and stuff that's putting on the players. But with your change, you're dealing with this change in terms of style of play, getting players ready for that. Well, then you're preparing players for that style of play in a longer game now as well. So what's now the next approach that you need to take, or is there any sort of differences that you need to change or adapt that program to take that into account?
Yeah, so I think for us, looking at last season, if we'd have had to do 112 minutes last season, we had a squad of 15 first team pros. Like, we really would have struggled. Luckily, this season, I think we're going to have a bigger squad. But I think it's more about education now to the manager of, we're going to have to push our demands in training up.
Yeah.
And slowly overload that side of it. But it's going to take time. And whilst that adapting process takes its time, you might have to rotate players, and we might have to make decisions in games that you don't want to. So last night we're looking at, okay, we want to keep a strong team out, but at the same time we've got duty of care to players who have to go Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Tuesday. And obviously at the moment you're trying to look after the players as best you can, but at the same time push them on because we're still in that early part of the season. I know I spoke about our Christmas period. We've got 4 games in 10 days. If we're playing 110 minutes across all 4 of them, I'm telling you right now, we cannot allow the same 11 players to play in all 4 games.
No.
So again, it's just looking at that loading, and it's worst case scenario, isn't it? So was our worst case scenario ever 112 minutes before that first game of the season? Probably not. But now we're looking at, this is where the numbers are. Our worst case scenario has changed. So we now have to try and match that in everything we do. So our numbers have to be at that level, our robustness in the gym has to be quality to ensure that players don't break down. Because again, it's loads of minutes. And I think we're talking 20 minutes of extra time, but only 6 or 7 more minutes ball in play time.
Yeah.
So I think they were talking about potentially it having less of an impact later in the season. But we also are seeing that it's only 4 minutes in the first half, but 11, 12 in the second half when players are tiring, and whether it's a through fault of their own or that's just the way that footballers was in the past, but we never really noticed it. But it is sort of like when they are most fatigued, that is when the added minutes are coming. So it's trying to balance, okay, we might have our peak 5-minute demands, but now do we have to look at what are the peak demands in those last 20 minutes of the game? And can we match that at that fatigue in training so that we're ready for whatever may come? And again, I think we're looking at it now. The bigger issue for us now is substitutes.
Yeah.
Because they're missing out even more now than they used to. We were already playing catch up with them, and whatever we do in the week, you're always trying to catch up a match. But now, especially if it's 2-game week, we can't afford for 80% of our training time, 80% of our total distance to be in match and not training time. Because then those players only have 20% time to try and make up 2 games that are both 110 minutes long. Like, it's again just another challenge where we're looking at it as our duty of care to players now is we have to be at them levels so that they can tolerate that load. And again, probably goes on to gym programming later on. But last year we had our main issue was patellar tendinopathy. And again, if that's going to be a case this year, is that going to onset earlier on? And what we're combating that now, because we're anticipating that could be a problem later in the season, especially given these more minutes. And again, it's ridiculous the amount of distance we're covering purely based on just extra time on feet. It's almost as if you can't really compare to last season now.
Yeah, it's a different game, isn't it now?
100%. So we're putting last season behind us. As much as you can say, listen, if we take out this and account for the extra 20 minutes, it would be this last season. It's almost just a fresh slate of this is going to be now our average. This is going to be what we need to expect, and can we match that in what we do in the week?
The other thing I was going to say, which kind of ties in with where you're talking about substitutes there, is in your mind now, where you've got that core squad, that first team squad, does it expand past that now, where you're thinking maybe some 18s, 23s, they actually need to be more ready than ever to come into that for that period where the squad's going to get stretched?
100%. So we've gone from playing Saturday, 90 minutes. Generally, the same 11 could play those games. To now, you're playing 112 minutes. Is that now a 3-day recovery period? Is it still a 2-day? Can we still load heavy on Tuesday if they're still recovering from an additional load? And then again, do we need more players to be brought up just for that chance of they need to be ready?
Yeah.
So again, we've got on merit youth players playing in the Carabao Cup, but again, it's sort of our hands forced of the same players will not be able to tolerate 110 minutes Tuesday, Saturday for a prolonged period of time. And again, now that's the challenge for us as sports scientists, to have them subs in a state where, worst case scenario, someone gets injured in the first minute, they can tolerate that entire game without blowing up and without an injury and not being able to play for the next 2 weeks after that.
I mean, even if there's an injury 20 minutes into the game now, they're still going to get a 90-minute game in them, aren't they? Which is crazy.
Yeah.
You touched on the gym side of things, so it'd be great to dive into that now. So with all that in mind, and also obviously we spoke a lot on the podcast before about microdosing, about where we're getting our strength work in, our heavy days and all that sort of stuff. Do these changes, and just reverting back to the what you talked about in terms of style of play as well, how does that influence the program that you're doing in the gym?
I think obviously we've touched on the pitch side of it, but in the gym now, it's probably even more important to microdose. So this is sort of what we've looked at this season. I think last season we were great in terms of our lowers and power or main gym sessions. Our activation was sort of on the fly as and when we see fit, so more a mobility rather than activation. So this season we've moved a lot more towards, if this is the case and we're going to have to reduce volume of gym work, can we microdose into the morning sessions? And it's sort of two birds with one stone. You microdose a good bit of strength, but you also get hopefully a bit of post-activation potentiation, and they are able to perform better on the pitch. So we've moved again towards, it's a hot topic at the moment, but using isometric work in activation sessions. And again, it's coupling it with what's going to be happening on the grass. So if we're looking at a Tuesday and it's intensive, small-sided, super high press, loads of accel decels, we'll prep them with a program in the morning that supplements that, whether it be strength work, single leg work, load tolerance, all building towards can they withstand what is about to happen on the grass. And also, we're microdosing strength, and we're trying to get a bit of potentiation in there as well. The issue then comes, obviously, when you have a 2-game week. Because, for example, this week we had a Wednesday game. It kills you Tuesday because it's a -1. And then it also kills you Thursday because you're a +1. So you've effectively gone from having 2 structured gym sessions to 0. So then it's a case of, we need to get some sort of microdosing of strength. Where can we get it in? And then it turns into, right, activation is the easiest place to do that. So Monday changes into a more, they're still on a +2. So it's again, you've still got the challenges of, they're still technically in a recovery phase. But can we microdose in longer hold isometrics? So a split squat, challenging single leg, Spanish squat or wall sit, variants like that, where they're still going to get a decent amount of muscular strength work and fatigue, but also we're looking again after those patellar tendon issues, trying to stay on top of tendinopathy as well as a mobility circuit, and then using some more push isometrics involved in that as well, to tolerate that. And then on a Tuesday or the -1, then we're looking at sort of that priming phase and putting more of that power work or plyometric work into that activation session. So again, they've missed gym time, and we've accounted for it in the periodization model as a deload week or a lower week for the gym. But also we're still microdosing and giving them little doses in there that can still keep that gym work up, even though we're effectively having 0 gym time this week. And again, just touching on the subs, it's tough because, again, we never know when they're going to be needed. So it'd be lovely to say, listen, you can still do your Tuesday gym, but do we take that chance? Can we afford to take that chance? Because again, as you said, someone could go in the 20th minute, they're still playing a full game because of the way that the added time's working this year. So it's just, again, different challenges, but facing those challenges head on and saying, listen, we still need to get work done. Can we do it in different areas?
What's been feedback from the players, Ben, on this?
So at the moment, with it being pre-season, it's been great. Like, the players are taken to it. Last year, we did activation, but it wasn't structured. A lot of the players saying, listen, it's either repetitive or we're in the gym all the time. We're in the gym more than we're on the grass. It's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to make sure that you get what you need so that you can last 112 minutes on a Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. We need you to be robust enough and not break down easily, reduce that injury risk so that you can play to your best ability across the whole season. Whether that changes later down the line when we're playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday in the middle of winter, again, it might have to be revisited then. But at the moment, it's been great buy-in. Players are taking to it brilliantly, to be fair.
And is there anything, we didn't actually discuss this, so if you don't want to talk about this, don't worry. But in terms of the MDT, bringing your physios into the mix, is there anything that they're potentially flagging up? So when you're having discussions about these extra minutes and all, how this is going to accumulate as well, because we're talking now, we're 2 games into the season, still really early. It's actually sunny outside, which is amazing. But when you said, like, when we get to that Christmas period and beyond, is there anything that the physios are sort of talking about and highlighting from their perspective?
I think at the moment it's just flagging the fact of the increased load. So we're prepping for 2 games of last season, albeit the average of our worst 5 games in terms of, I say worst, most distance, for the worst case scenario. But that's almost been blown out of the water by even our first 2 games this season. So it's like we can only prep for so much. We're now almost prepping for the unknown.
Yeah.
And now we know the unknown. We just need to make sure that our load matches what we're doing on the game. And again, just the main thing for us is keeping on top of things. So for us, tendinopathy, whether it be Achilles or patella, they're the 2 big issues for us of what could creep in from increased minutes. Purely just based on time on grass. And sort of managing them now and tackling them now, hopefully reduces issues that we see later on in the season. Again, I think they're in the unknown as well. I can't speak for them, but I think looking at this, we're all a bit like 112 minutes in a game, like it's unheard of.
Yeah.
So I guess we're just playing it by ear and creeping that load up to a point at which we can comfortably say, listen, players can do this much 3 times in the week. We're happy with where we are now. And again, then just having a sort of fluctuation of normal week, a little overload and a little deload, depending on where that comes, and just fluctuating that between. And then again, looking at that Christmas period, there may potentially, I think we've got 3 clear weeks before it. So in those 3 weeks, we might have to creep the load up even more, just so that the players come. We deload the week before and say, listen, now you're ready. You're used to this load. Go 4 games in 10 days. Fingers crossed. We all come for it. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of buy-in, developing buy-in from key stakeholders, regardless of who that would be, does this actually make things a little bit easier from your perspective? Because it's just describing extra load on the players and then the need for this work even more, isn't it?
I think so. But then at the same time, like, we have a crisis meeting on Monday because they've never seen 112 minutes either.
Yeah.
And it's almost saying to them, we don't need to worry because we will prepare the players to do that. And hopefully luckily we're at pre-season. So we've overloaded enough that we're at a comfortable level anyway.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit higher than we anticipated, but we're almost sitting them down and saying, it's okay. There's no need to panic. We'll get on top of it. Yeah, it's a shock to all of us, but obviously we will program this in as it goes on. And I think that's pretty much the same on going back to pre-season, developing how the new manager and director of football want data reported. Again, it's very much a case of presenting what we have and having discussions. I think it's turned out all right, and in a sense of it's relatively similar, and they're okay with how we presented things last season. Um, but then again, sort of developing a rigid testing structure. Last season, I think when new players came in, it was sort of we need to get them up and at it straight away. Whereas this season, we've sort of said we still need that time to profile them, test them in everything we test them in, and say this is the type of player they are. This is what they still need to improve on, so that we can individualize it for them, rather than just saying, "Well, he's come in, he's a week behind. We need to get after him."
Yeah.
And then it's also that making them understand that the players have already had a week, and you're bringing this new player in, and you want him to go straight away at what is an overload on even last week.
Yeah.
And sitting them down and saying, we know where we want you to be, but it's going to take time. Give us that time. And luckily, or unluckily, we got enough games in that small preseason 4-week window we had to be able to get everyone up and give them that 90 minutes exposure that we sort of needed to tick off to say that's where they are. They've had a 90 minutes. They're good to go for the start of the season.
Yeah. This is going to be a learning as you go, isn't it? Like it'll be amazing to have the conversations throughout the season. I think it's really important as well to get people's different perspectives, because I mean the time's going to be different game to game. Yeah, there's just so many challenges, isn't there? It just makes it such a individual season in that sense, doesn't it?
And it's also like, so if we look back to pre-season, refs are just doing 245s.
Yeah.
So we're looking at pre-season going, we're in an okay place because compared to last season, we're fine.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, first game of the season comes, 112 minutes, and you're like, I've never seen numbers like it. And all of a sudden, I think that's where the panic stations come from, and that's where the relationships with those key stakeholders, whether it be players as well, you think 112 minutes, I can't go again in 4 days. And it's just sitting them down and saying, listen, we've prepared you for this, and having that good relationship with whoever you're talking to, and just saying, we've got it under control. Don't need to worry. It's just another one of them things that you can't foresee happening.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll have it all sorted by now or in a few weeks' time.
That individualization as well is important, isn't it? Because across a squad, like everyone knows of players that are just physical freaks. They could probably play 120 minutes every single week and have no issues and do that for a whole season. Whereas there's others that are going to really struggle, isn't there? So that really comes into it as well, doesn't it? Especially in a season like this.
And it's, again, it probably touches on the manager change as well. So we had players last season who you could pretty much guarantee we're going to get 90 minutes every game.
Yeah.
And then now the new manager comes in and some of them might drop out. And it's hard for us. It's never a nice thing to tell a player, this is your profession, but you can't do your profession because you're not getting selected for this game. And that's another one where buy-in's crucially important in how you can relate to players and get them to buy into what you're doing. Because the last thing certain players want is, I was playing 90 minutes every game last season, but now I'm not playing, and you want me to do 90% on a squat? Yeah, I ain't doing that.
Yeah.
And it's having that, we need you to be ready again for those super long games. You could come in, someone could get injured, you could be in, and we need you to be robust enough and ready enough to do that game. And being able to individualize what certain players need, again, is crucially important in a sense of we need to look after them as best we can. Some players are going to play 112 minutes. If they've got any sort of weakness, we need to be hitting that in the gym to give them the best chance of lasting the whole season.
Yeah.
As you said, Strud's put on Twitter, I think 8 extra games it would equate to.
Yeah, mad.
So, especially if you add in cup runs, you're talking effective 65, 70 game season. and you're trying to peak. It's a multi-peak sport. You're trying to peak players 70 times. It's just, yeah, it's something we got to be conscious of, and that's where again the microdosing comes in, and making sure we keep on top of everything we do.
Yeah, I suppose it'd be fascinating, won't it, to see how that may impact style of play going forward, like across the whole season. Rotations, we might see more rotations in terms of squads. It'd just be interesting to see how coaches and managers actually deal with it, that as a challenge as it goes on as well, won't it?
Yeah, and I think on the back from our side, it'd be interesting to see injury incidence rate
Yeah,
and whether that goes up. Now, obviously, you can't say correlation is causation, but whether there is a fact of we did have more injuries, is it because we were doing these extra games? Did all the injuries come at the end of the season? And how do we pick that?
yeah,
How do we say that? Look at standing here now. How can we say what will happen come March and April? So we just got to best prepare them as we can for each individual game that's coming up now, and hopefully they're ready for that game and they get through scot-free, and then move on to the next one.
definitely. But just looking at the time, I don't want to keep you all day. But and I know we've maybe not touched on some stuff that we did say we were going to touch on, but I think this has been really important, a really important time. So I hope people have taken quite a bit from it to get your perspective on how you're approaching it. And I know it's going to be week by week, game by game, but I really appreciate you diving into all that because it wasn't necessarily something we touched on until 5 minutes before the podcast. But what we'll do is we'll move on to the quick fire questions just to wrap things up. The first of which I always ask, who've been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
So I think starting off, just getting that shoe in the FAW, probably Tony Strudwick. Again, you always probably best associate that with the person who gave you the first opportunity.
Yeah.
I think the first opportunity is always the hardest to come by. And again, it's probably something that we'll touch on in a later question of what advice would I give myself. Experience and opportunity is everything. I think I should have taken that earlier. And I'll always say experience can be different between two people. You can have 5 years experience, but again, if it's all with the same environment, same manager, is that the same as someone who has 5 years experience under 5 different managers or even more?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, Dave Carolan said that, are you gathering experience or experiences? And I think that's basically the same thing, isn't it? And the other point on that is that when practitioners are at a point in their career to give that first experience, from what you just said, that highlights the importance of that as well, doesn't it? Because coaches that's going to be something massively influential for that person coming through as well.
And it's good in a sense of you can mold them and look after them.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get better experience yourself in explaining and giving rationale to why you're doing things you're doing, rather than just someone coming in and saying, this is what I've done before, here we go, easy, and then you just go, yeah, no worries, no one's learning anything. Sometimes it's good for your own CPD to give out that experience and say, get challenged. Like, if you're fresh out of uni, I know when I went to Wales, I hit that point at which I went, I know absolutely nothing. But it's the point at which you know the most information.
Yeah.
And it's the freshest in your mind. I probably couldn't tell you some of the lectures I had on physiology in first year, like, just because my memory's that bad. But getting that experience and that first opportunity, yeah, it's crucial.
Definitely. What would you say your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
Two things. I think we touched on it in there: buy-in and being able to buy-in with key stakeholders. I think it's understanding. I've worked through a range of ages, and everyone's different. It's understanding what each person responds to, and then I guess just resilience in both having confidence in what you're doing to be the right thing, and also resilience in. I sat there for a year and a half applying for jobs, and it is tough to get that opportunity. And as soon as you get it, just take it with both hands and throw yourself in at the deep end.
Yeah, great advice. You mentioned it before, but if you were sitting down with Ben, just coming fresh out of uni, what would be your top bit of career advice for yourself?
I think, again, first thing I'd say is, what experience do you have?
Yeah.
Because I think uni is a great time to do things on the side. You don't have any commitments. You might have obviously sports or whatever, but try and get as much experience as you can. And secondly, probably just throw yourself into the deep end. It's okay to make mistakes. I think one of the things I think when I went into Blackburn more so was, I'm learning against people that have had years experience. So I was almost thinking, am I getting judged? Am I going to say the wrong thing? And what I'd say is, listen, you're only going to learn by saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing, because then you'll know what's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, just throw yourself in and don't be scared to make mistakes.
Definitely. Great advice. CPD then, what's your approach to that now? Obviously tackling everything day to day in the season is one thing, but you as a practitioner and constantly improving, how do you go about it?
I think I'm quite privileged in the sense of I'm second in command. So I'm sort of the one that's got the time to be able to go out and take pieces of advice and bring it back. So for me, it's going to get accredited, maybe even doing coaching badges and understanding if I'm going to be giving advice to coaches, I need to understand where they're coming from, and the best way to do that, I think, is understanding the game. And then also obviously understanding gym wise. But I think podcasts are a great thing. Just stick them in the car, when you're driving to work, drive home, just constantly keeping on top of things, and don't ever let work get on top of you, and always keep your head focused on what you want to learn. And there's always things you can learn out there. You're never ever 100%.
No, and like you say, this season sums it up, doesn't it? You feel like you might get to grips with how you're going to go about it, and then spanners are thrown in the work. So, no, I think it's really important. Ben, there probably is going to be people that maybe want a bit of a chat with you after this, and maybe ask a few extra questions on things and catch up with you throughout the season. Where would you direct people? Is there anywhere in particular?
Probably LinkedIn. I think it's the only place I've probably got a professional profile. You can follow me on Instagram if you want, but it's not. It's nothing to do with sports science. Yeah, so I just jump to LinkedIn. I'm relatively active on there. I'm one of them that's like creeps in the shadows, doesn't necessarily post, but I think it's one of the best tools for taking advice and seeing what other people do and just learning from other people and saying, that's good, little nugget, try it out, see if it works.
Yeah, 100%. But I really appreciate you coming on. And like I say, I apologise in a way that we didn't cover everything that we originally planned, but I think this will be really beneficial for a lot of people dealing with those same challenges at the moment. So I really appreciate you covering all that.
That's great, Ben. Thanks for getting me on.
Thanks, mate. We'll catch up soon.
Will do. See you later, mate.